A millionaire caught the maid with his son in the pool and was shocked. The billionaire caught his housekeeper with his son in the pool and froze when he realized what he was seeing. Nate stopped in the backyard when he saw Elena in the water, holding Lucas tight, his 8-year-old son wearing blue arm floaties and smiling broadly for the first time in 18 months. That embrace was too real. He stood there, completely motionless, watching Lucas laugh in that free and genuine way that he thought had vanished along with Catherine, his late wife, over a year and a half ago. Elena held the boy carefully as if cradling something priceless, and her gray and white uniform clung to her body in a way that made it crystal clear none of this had been planned. Nate moved to step forward, but his foot accidentally landed on a dry branch lying on the path. The sharp crack echoed in the afternoon silence, jarring enough to startle all three of them. Elena whipped her head around with lightning speed, her dark brown eyes widening in horror as she spotted her employer standing there. The smile on her lips vanished instantly, replaced by pure and profound fear. But what hurt Nate, more than Elena's reaction, was the transformation on his son's face. Lucas turned, his clear blue eyes identical to Catherine's, finding his father standing there. And in that instant, the bright, free, and genuine smile disappeared as if it had never existed. The joy on the boy's face evaporated, replaced by something far worse: fear. Lucas's small shoulders drew inward, his mouth fell open, but no sound emerged, and his eyes, those eyes that had been overflowing with happiness just moments before, were now filled with worry. Nate felt as if someone had just punched him hard in the stomach. The air in his lungs seemed to be sucked away. He realized a brutal truth he had tried to deny for months. His son was afraid of him. Not the kind of fear that comes before punishment or scolding, but the kind of fear when a child no longer knows how to approach their own father, afraid that any moment of happiness will be shattered by his presence. Elena slowly released the boy, her hands trembling as she let Lucas go. She backed away in the water as if trying to disappear, trying to make herself smaller, more harmless. Her face went pale, her lips quivered, and Nate could clearly see the panic in her eyes. It was the look of someone waiting to be punished, of someone too familiar with being blamed. Lucas swam to the metal ladder at the pool's edge, his movements clumsy and quick. He climbed up, water streaming from his body onto the stone patio. He stood there, between his father and Elena, his small body shivering from cold, or fear, perhaps both. The blue arm floaties still wrapped around his thin arms, now looking ridiculous and sad on a child who was no longer laughing. The silence that enveloped the garden was suffocatingly heavy. Nate could hear birds chirping somewhere in the distance, water dripping from Lucas onto the ground, and his son's quick, rapid breathing. Every sound was amplified in this tense silence, making this moment stretch like an eternity. He looked at his son, truly looked at him, perhaps for the first time in months. The blue floaties wrapped around arms that were too thin. Dark brown hair plastered to his small face, revealing gaunt features he had never noticed. Large eyes staring at him with fear and anticipation, waiting for his reaction, waiting to know if he was in trouble. Then he turned to look at Elena. She still stood in the water, water up to her waist, both hands gripping the pool edge behind her, as if needing something to hold on to. Her gray and white uniform clung wetly to her thin frame, and he could see her trembling. Not from cold despite the water not being warm, but from fear. It was a primal fear, the fear of someone who had lost everything and knew they could lose again at any moment. Nate opened his mouth to speak, but it took several seconds before he found his voice. When the words finally escaped, they sounded colder than he intended, sharper than he wanted. "How long has this been happening?" Elena flinched as if struck. "Just today, Mr. Morrison." Her voice trembled, the words rushing out as if she were trying to explain, trying to justify herself before it was too late. Lucas came down here and It was too hot upstairs, Lucas interjected, his voice so small Nate had to strain to hear it. This was the first time the boy had spoken to him in days. I just wanted to... But Lucas didn't finish the sentence. His throat closed up, his lips trembled, and then tears began rolling down his cheeks, mixing with the pool water still clinging to his small face. Nate felt a fierce pain spreading through his chest, but he tried to keep his face emotionless. "Lucas," he said, his voice stiffer than he wanted, "go inside and change. I need to talk to Elena for a moment." The boy looked at him, then at Elena, his eyes desperate. And then Lucas did something he hadn't done in months. He begged. "Don't fire her, Dad," his voice choked with tears. "Please, it was my fault. She was just—" Nate couldn't speak. His throat constricted. No words could escape. This was the first time in months, perhaps in over a year, that Lucas had actually asked him for anything. And it was asking him not to take away the only person who seemed to understand him. When the silence stretched on, Lucas turned and ran into the house, his small footsteps leaving a trail of water on the stone floor. His sobbing echoed in the space and then faded as the glass door closed behind him. Nate stood there in silence for a long while, watching the direction his son had disappeared. Then he slowly walked to the pool's edge and sat down, letting his feet in their expensive suit touch the cold water. He gestured for Elena to come closer with a slight nod. Elena hesitated, her eyes looking toward the door where Lucas had just run, then back at Nate. Finally she moved forward, but still kept a safe distance, several steps away from him. Water from her uniform dripped down into the water below, creating small ripples. Though the Palo Alto afternoon was still warm, she continued trembling, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as if trying to keep warm, or perhaps trying to protect herself. "How long have you worked here?" Nate asked, his voice trying to be gentler than before. 4 months, Mr. Morrison," Elena replied, her voice still shaking. Nate nodded, looking down at his hands. "Mrs. Chen hired you?" "Yes, sir." A heavy moment of silence passed. Nate took a deep breath before asking the next question, the question he knew he should have asked months ago. "Tell me about Lucas, about how he is at home." Elena bit her lip, clearly torn about what to say. But then, as if a dam broke, she began to speak. "He cries every night," she said softly, the words escaping with difficulty. "I hear him from downstairs when I'm cleaning." Nate felt as if someone had just squeezed his heart. "He cries?" "Yes, sir, and he has nightmares. I hear him screaming for his mother, crying until exhausted." Elena's voice grew stronger, as if once she started, she couldn't stop. "He doesn't eat properly. I see the food on his plate barely touched, and sometimes I find him hiding in the closet, sitting in the darkness, hugging one of Mrs. Catherine's shirts." Each sentence was like a knife stabbing into Nate. He swallowed hard. Does he talk to you?" "Yes, sir. When I clean, he sometimes comes down and sits on the stairs, watching me work. At first he was just silent, but after a few weeks, he started talking." Elena paused, wiping away falling tears. "He talks about his mother, about what they used to do together, about how he's forgetting the sound of her voice." "Catherine's voice?" Nate repeated, his voice choking. "Yes, he says that's what he fears most, forgetting what his mother sounded like. He tries to remember, but it fades more each day." Elena took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "And he thinks it's his fault." "His fault?" Nate looked up, eyes wide. "He thinks his mother died because of him. He doesn't understand what cancer is, only knows that his mother was in pain and then she was gone. And somehow, in his head, it's his fault." Elena wiped her tears, voice trembling. "He feels invisible in this big house. He says no one sees him anymore. No one really looks at him. Nate couldn't speak. His throat constricted, air seemingly unable to enter his lungs. "And he pretends to sleep," Elena continued, her voice dropping, "every night when you come home." "He pretends to sleep?" Nate repeated, his voice broken. Elena nodded, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. "He told me he doesn't want to bother you. He thinks you don't want to remember Mrs. Catherine, and if he talks about his mother, it will make you sadder. So he stays silent. He pretends everything is fine. He pretends to sleep so you don't have to see him cry." Nate felt as if someone had just punched him straight in the stomach, taking away all the air. He had become the kind of father his son had to pretend in front of. The kind of father an 8-year-old child felt needed to be protected from his own pain. "Today," Elena continued, voice trembling, "Lucas came down here because it was too hot upstairs. I was cleaning the living room when I heard splashing. I ran out and saw him wearing floaties about to get in the pool." She paused, wiping tears. "I tried to tell him to go back inside, but he started crying. Not the kind of silent crying he usually does, but real crying, crying until he couldn't breathe." Nate listened, each word like a nail being driven into the coffin of his failure as a father. "I was scared," Elena admitted. "Scared he would do something. Scared if I left him alone. Scared he would... So I told him he could get in the pool if I stayed with him. And he stopped crying immediately. He grabbed my hand and begged me not to leave." Her voice broke completely. "I couldn't say no. I couldn't." "Why?" Nate asked, his voice hoarse. "Why did you get in the pool with him? You could have called someone, called Mrs. Chen, called me." Elena looked straight into his eyes for the first time since the conversation began. And in that look, Nate saw a deep pain, an understanding born from experience, not from education or training. "Because I know what that feels like, sir," she said softly but firmly. "Know what it feels like to lose everything and no one realizes you're drowning. Know what it feels like to cry for help and no one hears. I know because I've been there, and I couldn't let another child go through that alone." Elena's last words hung in the air between them. Nate looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time, not as an employee, but as a human being with her own story, her own wounds. "Do you have children?" he asked gently. Elena shook her head, her voice when answering full of deep sorrow. "No, sir, I don't have anyone." She paused, then continued with a trembling voice. "But I had a little brother. Miguel, he was 9 when he died." Nate felt a jolt in his chest. 9 years old. Lucas was almost 9. "How did he die?" he asked, though he had already guessed part of the answer from the pain in her eyes. Elena's breathing became difficult. "A fire. I was 12. She looked down at her hands, specifically her left arm. I couldn't save him." For the first time, Nate noticed the scar on Elena's left arm. Old burn marks running from her wrist up to her elbow, the skin wrinkled and discolored. It was the kind of scar only fire could create, the kind of scar time could never completely erase. Elena caught his gaze and pulled her arm closer to her body. But then, as if deciding something, she extended her arm for him to see. "That night," she began, her voice broken but determined, "I heard Miguel screaming. He was calling my name from his room. I tried to run through the fire to get to him, tried to reach his door, but the doorframe collapsed before I could get in. The fire caught my arm." Nate swallowed hard, imagining the horrific scene, a 12-year-old trying to save her little brother. "The firefighters pulled me out," Elena continued, tears flowing freely. "I struggled, screamed, begged them to let me go back, but they held me tight. They had to hold me while I watched the house burn, while I heard Miguel's screams getting quieter and quieter, then silent." Her voice broke completely. And then, just silence. "Your parents..." Nate didn't need to finish the sentence. They died in there too. My father was drunk. My mother had left us years before. Just my father, Miguel, and me. That night my dad was too drunk, dropped his cigarette. He fell asleep on the first floor and never woke up. I survived only because I was on the second floor, closer to a window. Nate couldn't imagine it. A 12-year-old child losing everything in one night. Then 6 years in the foster care system, Elena said, her voice becoming hollow, as if telling someone else's story. 8 different families. No one wanted a child with problems, a child who had nightmares every night, a child who woke up screaming, a child who couldn't talk about family without crying. She paused, wiping tears. One of the families, their son, when I was 15. She didn't finish the sentence, but Nate understood, and anger flared in him, anger at what she had to endure. I learned that no one comes to save you, Elena said softly. You have to save yourself. So I did. I survived. I left the system when I turned 18, worked 3-4 jobs at once, slept in my car, tried to build a life. And then, her voice trembled more, when I was 23, I met a man, David. I thought I'd finally found someone. Then I got pregnant. For the first time since Miguel, I felt hope. I thought maybe this was my second chance, a chance to protect someone, to do this right. Nate saw her shaking. David left as soon as he found out, she whispered. And at 6 months, I lost the baby, alone in the hospital. I held my daughter, Sophia, I named her Sophia, for 3 hours before they took her away. She sobbed. I failed again, couldn't protect anyone again. You tried to take your own life, Nate said softly, not as a question but as a statement. Elena nodded. 3 times, at 14, 16, and 24. But each time, something, I don't know what, stopped me. Maybe Miguel, maybe Sophia, maybe I was just too cowardly to actually do it. Not cowardly, Nate said firmly. You're alive, because you're brave. Elena looked at him, tears streaming. When I saw Lucas today, when I saw him crying, saw him desperate, I saw Miguel. I saw the little brother I couldn't save. And I saw myself at 8 before everything happened when I was still just a child. Her voice broke. I thought, maybe this time I can help. Maybe this time I won't fail. Maybe this time I can save someone before it's too late. Nate looked at the woman before him, someone who had been through hell and still found ways to care for others. Someone who had lost everything but still gave. And he realized that Elena didn't just understand Lucas. She was Lucas, just 20 years older and still carrying wounds that hadn't healed. Nate left Elena at the pool with a promise to talk again later. He walked into the house, his feet heavy as lead as he climbed the stairs leading to Lucas's room. Each step was a reminder of how many days he had passed this room without stopping, how many nights he had come home too late to talk to his son. He stopped at Lucas's door and knocked softly. No answer. He knocked again. Lucas, can I come in? Silence. Nate slowly turned the doorknob and pushed the door open. Lucas sat on the bed, already changed into dry clothes, clutching a picture frame to his chest. Even from the doorway, Nate knew which photo it was, the picture of Catherine smiling radiantly on Lucas's birthday 2 years ago, when everything was still normal, when they were still a complete family. Lucas's eyes were red and swollen, his small face still wet with tears. When he looked up and saw his father, he drew himself in, hugging the frame tighter, as if afraid it would be taken away. Nate entered the room, but instead of sitting on the bed as expected, he sat down on the floor, right below, lowering himself to his son's eye level. This small gesture made Lucas look at him in surprise. "I'm not firing Elena," Nate began, his voice gentle. Lucas looked up, hope flickering in his tear-soaked blue eyes. "Actually," Nate continued, "I want her to spend more time with you. To help you? To help us. Really? Lucas's voice was so small, Nate could barely hear it. Really. But first, I need to tell you something. Nate took a deep breath, feeling his throat tighten. I've been a terrible father. No, Dad. Lucas shook his head vigorously. Yes, son, I have been. Nate felt tears beginning to fall, for the first time since Catherine's funeral, the first time he allowed himself to feel. I didn't know you had nightmares. I didn't know you were hurting so badly. I didn't know you missed swimming. I didn't know you pretended to sleep every night when I came home. Each confession was like a nail driven into his heart, but they needed to be said. Lucas looked at his father, lips trembling, and then everything he had held in for months burst out. I didn't want to make you sadder, he sobbed. You were always working and tired, and I thought if I stayed quiet, if I didn't cry, you'd be okay. But you still weren't here. You were still gone. I needed you, but you weren't there, Lucas continued, words pouring out like a broken dam. Mom died, and then you disappeared too. I lost both of you. I'm completely alone in this big house, and no one sees me. No one cares if I'm hurting. Lucas's words pierced through Nate like arrows. His 8-year-old son, 8 years old, had felt completely abandoned, and it was his fault. You're right, Nate said, his voice broken. I did abandon you. I ran away because I was too scared. Scared to feel, scared to face losing your mother. So I hid in work and left you alone when you needed me most. He crawled across the floor, closer to his son. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Lucas. I'm forgetting Mom's voice, Dad, Lucas whispered, tears streaming. I try to remember, but it's fading. What if I forget completely? What if Mom thinks I don't love her anymore? Nate couldn't take it anymore. He pulled his son into his arms, holding him tight for the first time in 18 months. Truly tight, not the perfunctory hugs at school drop-offs or mechanical pats on the shoulder. This was the embrace of a father desperately holding his only child. Lucas gripped his father's shirt, crying into his shoulder, and Nate cried too, releasing everything he had held inside for the past year and a half. They sat on the bedroom floor, two people holding each other and crying for everything lost, for all the wasted days, for both Catherine and for themselves. We'll remember Mom together, Nate whispered into his son's hair. Every day if you want. Forgetting doesn't mean you don't love her. It means you're human, and that's completely normal. Mom would want us to be happy again. Mom would want us to live, not just exist. Can we swim together tomorrow, Dad? Lucas asked between sobs. Like before? Like when Mom was here? Nate's heart broke and healed in the same moment. Yes, son, and every day after if you want. I promise. I'll be here. I won't leave you again. Lucas looked up, blue eyes brimming with tears, but with a small glimmer of hope. Do you really promise? I promise. Nate kissed his son's head. I promise you and Mom, we'll get through this, together. And for the first time in 18 long months in that small room, a father and son began finding their way back to each other. An hour later, when Lucas had fallen asleep on his bed with Catherine's photo clutched in his arms, Nate came downstairs. He found Elena in the hallway. She had changed into a dry uniform and was preparing to leave the house. Mrs. Chen had left since afternoon, leaving only them in this vast house. Elena, Nate called softly. Please, wait a moment. She turned, her eyes still worried. Mr. Morrison, I'm truly sorry about... No, Nate interrupted, stepping closer. I need to ask you something. He paused, as if searching for the right words. I want to hire you, not just to clean the house. I want you to stay, to help Lucas, to help us. Elena's eyes widened, not believing what she heard. Sir, I'm not a child psychologist. I don't have credentials. I'm just... You made my son laugh for the first time in 18 months, Nate interrupted, his voice full of emotion. 6 different therapists couldn't do that. They have degrees, experience, all the training, but you have what they don't. You understand him, not from books, but from the heart. But what if I fail? Elena's voice shook, small as a whisper. What if I make things worse? What if I'm not good enough? You're already good enough, Nate said firmly. No, you don't understand. Elena shook her head vigorously, tears beginning to fall. I told you about Miguel, about how I couldn't save him, but I haven't told you about Sophia. She took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. 5 years ago, when I was pregnant, I thought I finally had a second chance. A chance to do it right, a chance to protect someone. Nate remained silent, letting her continue. I planned everything, read every book about parenting, worked extra shifts to save money, prepared a room for the baby, even though it was just a small corner in my studio apartment. Elena's voice choked. And then at 6 months, I started bleeding, alone in the hospital. David had left me long before. No family, no one. They brought Sophia out to me. She was so small, so perfect. I held her for 3 hours, telling her I was sorry. Sorry I couldn't keep her safe. Sorry I failed. She sobbed. If I bond with Lucas, if I love him like my own, and then I have to leave or I fail him, I can't survive that again. I can't lose anyone else. Nate stepped closer, placing his hand on her shoulder. What if you don't have to leave? What if we make this permanent? What if this time you get to keep someone? Elena looked at him through tears. Why would you do this? Because my son needs you, and so do I. Nate was honest. We need someone to teach us how to live again, how to feel again. You showed us that in just one afternoon. Elena was silent for a long while. Then she wiped her tears and looked straight into Nate's eyes. I'll do it, but with one condition. Anything. You have to participate, she said firmly. I can't fix your relationship with Lucas for you. I can help, but you have to be present, truly present, not just physically, but emotionally. Lucas needs his father, not a substitute. Nate nodded, throat tightening. I promise. Teach me how to do that. Teach me how to be a better father. It's not complicated, Mr. Morrison, Elena said gently. Just be there. Listen when he talks. Sit with him when he cries. Don't try to fix everything. Just be his father. 2 hours later, 3 people sat around the kitchen table, not the formal dining table in the dining room, but the small table in the kitchen where Catherine used to love cooking. Elena had made simple pasta with what was in the fridge. Lucas sat between the 2 adults, eyes still a bit red, but with a new light. The light of hope. Will you be here tomorrow? Lucas asked during the meal, voice small but full of expectation. Elena looked at Nate, then smiled at the boy. Yes, if you want me to. I want you to, Lucas said, for the first time in months, a real smile blooming on his lips. I want you here. And in that warm kitchen with soft yellow light, 3 people, a father who had lost his way, a child who had lost hope, and a woman who had lost everything, began finding what they had been searching for, a family. The next morning, Nate woke at 6, not for work, but to keep his promise to his son. He found Lucas already awake, sitting on his bed in swim trunks, his eyes full of hope, mixed with fear that his father would change his mind. Ready, son? Nate asked, and the smile that bloomed on Lucas's lips was brighter than the morning sun. At the pool, Elena was already waiting, sitting at the edge with a cup of coffee in her hand. When she saw both of them walk out, a gentle smile appeared on her lips. Nate stepped into the water first, his movements somewhat awkward. It had been too long. Lucas jumped in after, his laughter ringing out as water splashed onto his father's face. Mom taught me to dive like this, Lucas said, his voice trembling as he mentioned his mother naturally for the first time. He performed the dive, though not perfect, but full of pride. Nate clapped enthusiastically. "Excellent, Luke!" And in that moment, watching his son smile brightly, he realized he was slowly finding his way back to being a father. On the third night, screams pierced the quiet atmosphere of the house at 2 a.m. But this time, Nate was the first to run in. He held Lucas thrashing in a nightmare, whispering comforting words until the boy woke, panicked and drenched in sweat. "It's not your fault," Nate repeated. "It was never your fault." Elena appeared at the door, and Nate waved her in. The three sat on the bed until dawn, talking about Catherine, about beautiful memories, about missing her. And when Lucas finally fell back asleep, his hands gripping both adults tightly, Nate knew they were heading in the right direction. On Wednesday afternoon, the kitchen became noisy for the first time in months. They made lasagna together, Catherine's special recipe. Lucas remembered some ingredients, Nate others, and Elena guided, letting father and son do it themselves. "Mom always added extra oregano," Lucas said, his voice still sad, but no longer desperate like before. "That's right," Nate smiled. "I forgot. Mom said that was the secret to this dish." Flour flew everywhere when Lucas accidentally knocked over the bag, and instead of scolding, Nate started laughing. Then Lucas laughed too, and Elena took a picture, the first picture of Lucas smiling since Catherine died. They stuck it on the refrigerator, a new memory beside old photos. On Saturday, Lucas asked if they could visit Mom. Nate panicked. He hadn't been to the cemetery since the funeral, couldn't face it. But looking into his son's eyes, he knew he had to. He looked at Elena, and she nodded. She would go with them. At the grave, Lucas knelt and talked to his mother as if she could still hear. "I'm doing better, Mom. Dad's here with me now. Elena's helping us too. We're learning how to live again." Nate knelt beside his son, placing his hand on the cold stone marker. And for the first time since burying Catherine, he cried, not crying in desperation like before in his office, but crying in acceptance, in farewell. "I'm sorry," he whispered to Catherine. "I'm sorry I left Lucas alone, but I'm trying now. I promise I'll take care of our son." Lucas hugged his father, and Nate hugged back, both crying in each other's arms. Elena stood a few steps away, silently witnessing this moment, tears also streaming down her cheeks. "It's okay to cry, Dad," Lucas said softly. "Elena says grief is love with nowhere to go. But now we have each other, so that love has a place now." On the drive home, Lucas sat between Nate and Elena in the car, hands holding both of theirs. He looked out the window and then said very softly, but with a certainty Nate hadn't heard from him before, "We're going to be okay. Not I'll be okay, or you'll be okay, but we." And for the first time in 18 months, Nate believed it. The third week began with a morning unlike others. Nate woke up and realized what day it was. 19 months since Catherine left. He had known this day would come, but in the busyness of recent positive changes, he hadn't prepared Lucas. When he knocked on his son's door, there was no answer. He opened it to find Lucas still in bed, though it was nearly 8 a.m. The boy lay curled under the blanket, face to the wall, exactly like the darkest days before. "Luke, are you okay?" Nate asked, stepping into the room. "Go away." Lucas's voice was small but cold. "I want to be alone." Nate felt panic rising. All their progress, had it vanished in just one night? Elena appeared at the door, reading the worry on Nate's face. She nodded to him, signaling to let her handle it. Nate reluctantly left the room, but stood in the hallway, listening. Elena entered and sat down on the floor beside the bed, not trying to force Lucas to look at her. "Today is a hard day," she said gently. "It's okay to have hard days." Silence. Then a trembling breath from under the blanket. "Grief doesn't follow a straight line," Elena continued. "There are good days and bad days. Today is one of the harder ones." Suddenly, Lucas sat up, face flushed red, eyes full of tears and anger, an emotion Nate had never seen in his son. "Why?" Lucas screamed, voice breaking. "Why did Mom leave me?" He grabbed a pillow and threw it across the room. Then a stuffed animal. Then a book. "Why did God take her? This isn't fair." Nate stepped into the room, instinct wanting to stop this anger, but Elena held up her hand, shaking her head. "Let him be angry," she said softly to Nate. "He needs this." Lucas continued, throwing everything within reach, screaming until his voice went hoarse. "I hate this. I hate that Mom's not here. I hate that I can't remember her voice. I hate everything." Nate watched his son with tear-filled eyes, realizing he had never allowed Lucas to be angry. He had always tried to keep everything calm, thinking that protected him. But really, he was just suffocating an important part of the healing process. Elena sat there, not trying to calm Lucas, just being present. "You're right," she said when Lucas paused to breathe. "It's not fair at all. You have every right to be angry. Your mom would understand." After the final burst of rage, Lucas collapsed on the floor, exhausted, sobbing. "I miss her so much it hurts in my chest. It hurts all the time." Nate knelt beside his son, pulling him into his arms. "I know, son. I do too." "Will it always hurt like this?" Lucas asked between sobs. Nate looked at Elena, and she nodded encouragingly. "Yes and no," he said honestly. "It will always hurt to some degree, but it gets easier to breathe around it. The pain becomes part of you, but it doesn't consume you forever." Elena pointed to the scar on her arm. "See? 16 years old, still there, sometimes still hurts, but I learned to live with it. Your grief is like that. It's part of you now, but it doesn't define everything about you." Lucas nodded, wiping tears. After a moment of silence, he asked, "Can we watch videos of Mom?" Nate hesitated. He hadn't watched those videos since the funeral, but then nodded. All three moved down to the living room. Nate opened the laptop and found the family video folder. The first video was Lucas's birthday last year. Catherine singing, her voice slightly off-key, but full of love. Lucas laughed through tears, hearing his mother's voice. Nate laughed too, arm around his son's shoulders. Elena sat beside them, asking occasional questions to keep the conversation going, to let memories be shared instead of buried. They watched videos until late afternoon, laughing at joyful moments, crying at touching ones. And when Lucas finally dozed off on the sofa, head resting on his father's shoulder, face peaceful. For the first time that day, Nate understood the new lesson. Healing isn't a straight line. There will be setback days. But what matters is they're going through it together. 3 months passed like a slow but steady journey. Lucas was no longer the silent child hiding in darkness. He ate regularly, slept better with fewer nightmares, and most importantly, he talked about his mother, about his feelings, about what he feared and hoped for. When Lucas volunteered to present at the school assembly on living with loss, Nate felt both proud and worried. He took the whole day off, something that had now become normal, and sat in the auditorium beside Elena. Around them, other parents whispered, curious about the woman sitting with Mr. Morrison. New nanny? Girlfriend? But Nate didn't care. He only focused on his son standing on stage. Lucas began trembling, voice so small the microphone barely caught it. "My name is Lucas Morrison. My mother died 21 months ago from cancer." He paused, taking a breath. "I thought my life was over too. I thought I'd never be happy again." Nate felt Elena squeeze his hand. "But then my dad came back," Lucas continued, voice growing stronger. "Not physically, he was always there, but emotionally. Dad started really seeing me again. He looked down at the seats, eyes finding his father and Elena. And someone else saw me too. She taught me it's okay to be sad, and it's okay to be happy again. Both can be true at the same time. The auditorium fell silent, everyone listening. "If you're grieving," Lucas said, voice clear and certain, "it gets better, not because you forget the person you lost, but because you learn to carry them in your heart instead of letting the pain consume you." He looked around the room. "And if you know someone who's grieving, don't try to fix them. Just be with them. That's all they need." When Lucas bowed, silence stretched for a second, then the entire auditorium rose in standing ovation. Teachers wiped tears. Parents turned to each other, moved. Nate didn't try to hold back. He let tears flow freely, not caring who watched. Beside him, Elena covered her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. In the back, Dr. Winters, Lucas's psychologist, stood with an expression of amazement at this transformation. After the presentation, classmates surrounded Lucas. For the first time, they wanted to talk, wanted to be friends. Lucas was no longer the weird grieving kid. He was the brave kid, the one who spoke truth that many feared to admit. In the hallway, other parents approached Nate and Elena. "Our son is struggling too," one mother said. "Could you share how you did it?" Others asked about Elena, about how she had helped. Nate and Elena exchanged glances. What they had done with Lucas, perhaps it was bigger than just their family. Perhaps their story could help others. That evening, after Lucas fell asleep, exhausted but happy, Nate and Elena sat on the back patio. The pool, where everything began, shimmered under the lights. The warm night air carried jasmine scent from the garden. Nate turned to Elena, heart pounding. It was time to say what he'd been holding for weeks. "I need to talk to you about something," he began. Elena tensed immediately. Old habit, always waiting for bad news. "Yes, Mr. Morrison?" "Nate," he corrected again. "After everything we've been through, please call me Nate." She nodded, but still waited, fear clear in her eyes. "6 months ago, I was barely surviving," Nate began, voice trembling. "My son was disappearing before my eyes. I was drowning in grief and work. Then you came into our lives." He paused, searching for the right words. "You didn't just save Lucas. You saved me too. You taught me how to feel again, how to be present, how to live instead of just existing." "I was just—" Elena started, but Nate raised his hand. "No, you did so much more. You gave pieces of yourself, your pain, your story, your heart. You loved my son when you didn't have to, when it would have been easier not to." Tears began streaming down Elena's cheeks. "I want to make this official," Nate continued. "Not just employment. I want you to become part of our family." "Really part of it?" Elena looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "Stay, not as an employee, as family. Be the person you already are to Lucas, but permanently, no risk of being fired. No temporary arrangement, just ours." "You're giving me a family?" Elena's voice broke completely. "No one's ever— I don't have." "I'm giving you a home," Nate said, voice full of emotion. "A place where you belong, where you're not alone anymore, where someone sees you, where your pain matters, where your past makes you stronger, not broken, a place where you're wanted, where you're needed, where you're loved." Elena sobbed, body shaking. "But what if I fail? What if I'm not good enough? What if you meet someone and don't need me anymore?" "You could never fail us," Nate said firmly. "You've given us more than you know. And yes, Lucas will grow up. Yes, maybe someday I'll love someone again. But none of that means losing you. Family isn't about need. It's about want. We want you here." "I'm scared," Elena whispered. "We'll be scared together. We'll mess up together. We'll get through together. because that's what family does. Elena looked into Nate's eyes, seeing sincerity there. After 28 years alone, 28 years surviving, finally someone was inviting her home. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll stay. I'll be family." A sound at the window made both turn. Lucas stood there in pajamas, eyes bright. "You're staying forever?" he asked, voice full of hope. "I heard." Elena opened her arms and Lucas ran out, launching into her embrace. "You're not leaving?" "Not leaving?" Elena whispered into his hair. "Promise?" "Promise?" Nate wrapped his arms around both, 3 people sitting on the patio under starry skies. 3 broken people finding wholeness in each other. 1 year later. The pool shimmered under California afternoon sun. Lucas, now 9, taller, healthier, swam perfect laps. He had joined the school swim team, won many medals. Elena and Nate sat at the pool's edge, feet in water, watching Lucas swim. Years of trust, love, healing had turned them into real family. "Thank you," Nate said softly, "for staying, for not giving up on us." "Thank you for giving me a family," Elena replied, "for teaching me I deserve happiness." Lucas swam over, splashing both. "What are you two being mushy about?" "You?" they said simultaneously, laughing. "Ugh, gross," Lucas laughed, but his eyes overflowed with love. And in the pool, where once witnessed deepest pain, now rang laughter of a family that found their way back to each other. Not perfect, but complete. Not like before, but beautiful in its own way. They had survived. They had healed. They had become family.